Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. If we could just take a seat, grab a drink. Well, good evening. My name is Simon Roberts. I'm the head and dean of Sydney Law School.
Yes.
And it is my privilege to welcome you to this event, the book launch Comparing Online Legal Education. What a handsome book it is. One should never judge it by its cover, but I think, and I'm sure Luke, Professor Nottage, will explain the context of the amazing artwork. Comparing online legal education, past, present, and future, and obviously a very important topic. But my first obligation, my privilege and duty, is to acknowledge country, and we are meeting here on the land of the Gadigal, the people of the Gadi, and I say this every time to visitors new to the campus, which is now called the Gadigal campus. You may have noticed that change on email blocks, the Gadigal campus rather than Camperdown campus. Those three-headed trees at the back there in the beautiful Indigenous garden we put in 3 years ago now, 130 years old, estimated, are Gadi trees. They are the trees from which our First Nations people of this area take their name. And I also welcome in language, trying to acknowledge and respect elders past, present, and emerging. Yini Kalawagan, Mari Buduri, Gadi Nurada, which means we meet together on this beautiful land of the Gadigal. And it's obviously a very important year in relation to First Nations peoples of Australia in how we're responding to the run-up to the referendum. Lots of different views being expressed. I do think the law school and the university more generally has obligations to create platforms for informed debate. And of course, many of our colleagues are contributing to that debate, hopefully shedding more light and fury into the discussions. But it is the law school that 3 years ago, in its law school board, endorsed the Uluru Statement. So we as a community have made that commitment and was the first unit of the university to do that. So, look, it's my duty and privilege and pleasure to welcome the book launcher. That is our Chief Justice of New South Wales Supreme Court, the Honourable Andrew Bell. Andrew has been the Chief Justice since March last year. And prior to that, he was President of the Court of Appeal, to which he was appointed as President in February 2019. He holds that concurrently as President of the Judicial Commission of New South Wales. His connections to this law school go back to the old New Law Building, which is opposite the courts downtown. He was a dual medalist in arts and in law, first class honours, obviously, and of course, a well-trodden path to Oxford to complete the PCL and top that as a Wynderian scholar. And obviously, there he forged his interest in conflicts of law, private international law, and prepared his DPhil, which he defended and became forum shopping and venue in transnational litigation. He is also co-author of that classic Nye's Conflicts of Law in Australia, and not only pursuing a career in practice, called to the bar and becoming a senior counsel in 2006, he also continued to part-time teach at the law school. For that contribution, we will always be grateful. So serving as an adjunct where he taught many generations of law school. So look, we couldn't get a better person to talk and launch this book than our Chief Justice, and so I welcome him to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean, and I also add an acknowledgement of the traditional owners and pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as to all First Nations people. It's a great pleasure, as always, to return to the Sydney Law School and to celebrate the work of scholars, especially where it relates to a topic of great interest and importance. And also I acknowledge my friend Professor Nottage, who is an energetic academic who not only has a range of academic interests as well as interests in public affairs, but to my perception at least, is quite dynamically engaged with legal education and also his keen interest in Japan, which involves him in going the extra mile in terms of more than just teaching his courses, but in facilitating programs, facilitating exchanges and facilitating discussion. And that, in a sense, is what a feature of this book, because it is on paper a discussion of a topic with contributions from, I think, 13 different jurisdictions from around the world by other scholars on the topic. Now, quality legal education is, of course, vital and foundational and closely linked to the quality of the legal profession, and that is to say the quality of the legal profession feeds directly into the maintenance of the rule of law, because without well-educated lawyers, our system of civil and criminal justice would quickly break down. The connection between legal education and the legal profession is formally reflected in New South Wales in the work of the Legal Profession Admissions Board. So there's not just a link as a matter of interest between legal education and the successful operation of the legal profession. It's not just a link by the discipline of law. It is fundamental to producing a well-educated legal profession. So I am institutionally and professionally extremely interested in quality legal education, not just as something which is intrinsically valuable, but is practically vitally important for the role of law in the broader community. Now, this year, as you know, we've seen the launch, as it were, in a developed and commercialised way of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and other forms of artificial intelligence, which will produce huge challenges for society in general, and will produce and is already producing specific challenges for the legal profession and legal education. It may well be that the next book in this series, in which comparing online legal education forms part, will be on artificial intelligence and its ramifications and implications for legal education. But before turning to the topic of this book, I wanted to make a few more general observations as the impact of technological change on the legal education and the legal profession and legal education and scholarship. Artificial intelligence, and before its advent, the increased use of audiovisual and then web-based conferencing or online facilities represent two of the three most significant technological changes that have occurred during my life in the law. The first was something I suspect most people in this room, who I take are significantly younger than me, not all, but many, take for granted and never had any exposure to. When I started as a student at this law school in 1984, mobile phones, laptop computers and email did not exist in any meaningful sense. Law libraries had hard copy catalogues. Law reports were what used to be described as noted up manually. That's to say, their owners or sometimes clerks would take a pencil and note if a particular decision had been followed in a more recent decision or departed from or criticised. Sometimes there were stickers you could put in, which were issued by the legal publishers to note up a text. Most judgments were not published. There might be a copy in the Supreme Court Law Library, but most judgments were not published and people never saw them, weren't aware of them. They weren't catalogued, other than they were a single copy was compiled in the unreported judgments section of the law library. It was impossible to search them or analyse them. And foreign legal material, whether in the form of journals or statutes or case law, was difficult, cumbersome and expensive to access. Even the current version of a statute was often difficult to identify because they only existed in paper form, and amendment acts were often not consolidated. So that was the world not so long ago, before the impact of, in a sense, the first significant wave of legal technology, at least in my lifetime, that is to say, the emergence of databases and the development of search engines, search tools like Casebase, etc., and searches of journal articles, etc. And to get international journals, you either had to travel to, I remember when I was doing my doctorate, 10 years after that, even then, I had to physically travel to an American library to access a number of the journal articles which didn't exist in Oxford's extensive collection. So that's only less than 30 years ago. Now, the changes which have emerged at that level, just in terms of databases and search engines, were largely beneficial, although even they were and have not been entirely without their costs as well. The vastness of the material now so immediately accessible poses its own challenges for identifying efficiently quality insights and valuable observations. And in terms of the practice, I suspect the explosion of available material has contributed to the lengthening of written submissions by barristers and probably the increased length in judgments with related costs for the profession of that because of the explosion of material. So that brings me to the online world. That was the first of the technological changes. The second of the major technological changes in terms of its impact is really the development, which is the subject of this book, initially audio-visual communications, what that facilitated, and then with the development of web-based online technology. So let me just start some comments on that topic by making some observations about the profession as opposed to the use of that technology in the academy. In the profession and before COVID, courts were certainly beginning to use audio-visual links and online technology in certain hearings, but many judges, at least, were slow to embrace it for a variety of reasons. Poor technology, let's say in the early days, links would drop out, there would be delays, etc., and judges would become frustrated. They would say there were difficulties in assessing credit, the credit of witnesses when viewing them online as opposed to having them physically in the courtroom and able to be observed fully in person. They would say, the critics would say it was potentially unfair because the witness was giving evidence in a different, less formal setting than the solemnity of the courtroom, with the administration of the oath in person, in front physically of the judge, etc. And they would also say the great difficulties in putting documents to witnesses who were remote, etc. So there were those judges who were sceptical of the use of technology. Others saw it as the way of the future. Now, the advent of COVID had at least two consequences. There was an immediate impetus and indeed an imperative both to skill up and improve facilities. Secondly, the possibilities and advantages of online engagement were revealed in an accelerated way. But the online world was thrust upon the profession by necessity, and the same occurred with the academy. Online communication, online work and online education provided an invaluable solution to an immediate and pressing problem. Various advantages were revealed, which was salutary, but the changes wrought, unlike the advances in technology, which have undoubtedly improved research, accessibility of information and knowledge through the development of databases and search engines, the advantages of online interaction, online learning and online practice were externally imposed out of necessity rather than adopted as and where appropriate and as a matter of choice. Now, nonetheless, real advantages emerged, real advantages became apparent. In terms of the disadvantages, whilst we all have our own views about the downside to online education or online practice, those perceptions, those negative perceptions, are largely impressionistic and anecdotal rather than systematic. And I think in terms of both generally and in terms of impact on the legal profession and the legal academy, the downsides of the pandemic response, which was online education, are still to emerge. Some can be identified, but we really haven't yet had the opportunity fully to assess the consequences, social and broader consequences of the pandemic and that rapid and radical shift to the online experience. And I think that will be something which will continue to be measured and evaluated as time goes by and as the particular generation or couple of 2 or 3 years worth of students were impacted. Now, in terms of the work of the courts post-pandemic, there is less scepticism now with the use of online mechanisms for the receipt of at least certain types of evidence and value in the use of technology for practical matters such as directions hearings and other short hearings. But for the most part, we have returned to life and litigation in person. And that is certainly something which I am on record as favouring. It's not because I'm a technophobe, which I'm not, but it's because of a deep belief on my part in the importance, for all sorts of reasons, of personal human interaction, not just at a social level, but at a professional level. Within the university sphere, there is, I suspect, a similar appetite to return predominantly to teaching in person, although there may be a divide in this regard between teachers and university administrators who see, no doubt, significant cost savings potentials with the online model. But just because legal education can be taught online does not mean that it should be, or that this at least should be the default model. And this is where the value and interest of the book comes in. It discusses the transformation of legal education during 3 time frames: pre-pandemic, pandemic and post-pandemic. That last category is, hopefully we're in that category, but projecting. As I said, across 13 different civil and common law jurisdictions, Australia, Canada, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, Japan, Pakistan, the Seychelles, and then from Europe, Croatia, Cyprus, and Italy. Each jurisdiction is examined in a report by local experts, which discusses online legal education with regard to the contextual factors, including the impact of the pandemic, and the impact of the pandemic, of course, varied in different jurisdictions. The impact on the legal profession in those various jurisdictions, how the quality of internet technology impacted and affected the success or otherwise of online education, including questions then of funding of particular universities. So we have in this book a really significant collection of data, both data and expert observations, which highlights that the experiences of both the pandemic and online life and online legal education have differed between jurisdictions for a variety of reasons, reflecting the different circumstances in which each jurisdiction operated. Socioeconomically less advanced jurisdictions obviously weren't able to flick the switch, as it were, to an instant online solution. Others were. So that international experience and comparative experience is a very valuable aspect of this study. Now, the book notes quite properly some very significant advantages in legal education in terms not only for research engagement and the ease with which scholars around the world are able to communicate, not as they once did by letter, and the occasional, but very occasional conference, not even by email, but obviously virtually in person, in different combinations, sometimes multiple combinations, sometimes small groups, etc. And with pressures on education budgets, obviously the ability to talk to people readily, to be able to communicate readily, is hugely advantageous in the great technological developments and the growing confidence in the technology and the confidence in the ability to interact that way is valuable. I can remember when I was a student in Oxford, there were two academics at different colleges writing on the same topic, writing books on the same topic, I think the same publisher, and neither of them knew each other was writing a book on the same topic until they were published. You know, I mean, crazy. So anything which facilitates communication and interaction is obviously a positive. It's also a positive insofar as if an academic is organising a course for his or her students, if there is a colleague or a number of colleagues specialised in that area from a different jurisdiction who can offer their own insight, it might be quite convenient for them to join a class for an hour or an online seminar for an hour. That's a hugely advantageous thing. One of the points made in the book is that our assessment of the value of online legal education should not be skewed by the pandemic experience. The pandemic experience was, for our generation, unprecedented, unknown, supervened by huge stresses and radical changes, and everybody had different reactions to the pandemic. But one of the very valid points made is that one shouldn't form necessarily negative views about the benefits of online education because of some residual resentment about the pandemic, etc. We have to differentiate, we have to fill it out, the real benefits, but also note the weaknesses. So the book balances, through the various commentaries and the overview special report, balances the advantages with perceived challenges in terms of the quality of education that an overemphasis on online education provides. And I share the concerns expressed by various authors about the limitation or restriction or reduction for students of being able to engage and derive a full-rounded education, including full-rounded legal education, if it is provided solely or predominantly online. The Honourable James Douglas, KC, who's very pleased to see here, wrote the foreword to the book, and he observed in that foreword, and I quote, "There is so much to be learned also in informal discussion with lecturers and other students, and from an environment where the social interaction and physical facilities are focused on what you are studying." And I agree with that. I have very fond memories of bombarding lecturers immediately after a lecture with follow-up questions. Whether those fond memories are shared by some of my lecturers, I'm not sure, although I suspect some of them may be, or at least they now may say they had fond memories. But it wasn't just the follow-up discussions with lecturers, it was the follow-up discussions with other students, etc., which I know theoretically could happen after an online class, but if you're there, if you're having the lived experience of the lecture, if you've observed the dynamics of people in the class with the Socratic method, to the extent the Socratic method is employed by, and that of course varies between lecturers, the extent to which they engage students in classes, and it may be, depends on whether it's a seminar-based course or how large the lecture theatre is as well. But very often, and it's the same in practice with conferences, after a conference, if you're walking back to chambers or from chambers, there will be discussions between senior practitioners and junior practitioners, debriefing, as it were, and the teaching, the informal teaching which occurs, and the informal learning which occurs around the formal learning. And I just remain to be convinced that that can be replicated in the online environment. Whilst much of the focus in the book is on the impact on students, it also occurs to me from my limited experience as a teacher that teaching online is unlikely to be nearly as rewarding an experience for the teacher. I've certainly, during COVID, presented at a number of conferences virtually, sitting at my desk, speaking into my iPad, trying to adjust my head, etc. But you don't get any visual cues, you don't get a sense of the audience, the people who are listening. You sense from your own experience as a recipient of such an address that half of them will be checking their emails while they're listening with one ear or being distracted. And it's not a particularly, I certainly found not a particularly rewarding experience. Some of the best teachers thrive on the interaction with their students. One knows that from personal experience. We all have our favourite teachers from law school, and they were the ones who engaged with the class. And that I think for those teachers and a number of teachers at this law school from my generation who are still here, or one sort of semi-retired and one was about to retire, but they were so popular and such good and effective teachers because of their really personal engagement. And that's what they loved about teaching. They did the amount of research, people have different emphasis on research or teaching, but for teaching to be rewarding, often one needs the response and the interaction. And so that's another very real cost, it seems to me, in the if online education becomes online legal education becomes the default or the dominant mode. So I think I've probably spoken enough, especially there's some drinks up the back end. It's, what are we at? When's Thursday night during the week? This is not a lecture, it's a book launch. What I wanted to do, is to congratulate the editors / principal authors. There's a lot of industry involved in organising a book like this and bringing it to fruition. I think it will be a very valuable book because I do think, as I intimated before, one does have to systematically analyse what was thrust upon us very quickly. It wasn't as a matter of choice, but we had to shift in this particular way. And there's an issue about whether we stay with the shift or we use the shift in an intelligent way to fill out that which was advantageous, but be very cautious about the fact that we had a perfectly good and effective traditional method of in-person legal education prior to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice, and all of you for attending not only the book launch, but really a fine lecture on comparative legal education and also the links to the legal profession. I have prepared some remarks, which is not my wont, as some of my students know from class, but I'm going to make sure I don't miss out thanking others in this endeavour. Chief Justice has already thanked the Honourable James Douglas, who contributed the foreword, and is a long-standing elected member of the International Academy of Law, which produced this series in the Olympics or the World Cup of comparative law every 4 years. And I should also acknowledge the then Secretary General of that Paris-based academy, which has been going for over 100 years, for inviting me early in the pandemic year, onset year of 2020, to become the general reporter on the topic that had come up from the national committees, online legal education. Well, that's a winner, and it's been a great pandemic project to track as developments have unfolded around the world. The pandemic, unfortunately, did mean that some of the national reporters who put their hand up to add even more comparative breadth to the project couldn't produce reports in the end, but I think we have a good mix of, a representative mix of jurisdictions to make the sort of generalisations and assessments the Chief Justice has alluded to in terms of weighing pros and cons and drawing lessons from that global experience. I'd also like to acknowledge, and this is being recorded for the podcast, all the contributors to the book, especially my co-editor and long-standing collaborator in research and other events, the Seijo University Professor Makoto Iwasuki, the co-editor, and a lot of the ideas in the introductory chapter came out of some Zoom conversations, especially in the early days as we compared experiences and challenges in shifting to online legal education. I'd also like to thank Professor Kent Anderson from the University of Newcastle now, who's also deeply involved in our Australian Network for Japanese Law, co-founded with me years ago, because he had this great chapter we used in the introductory general report, looking at the different gatekeepers across jurisdictions that regulate entry into the legal profession. Lawyers themselves, governments, universities, or the market. And so we use that as one of the contextual factors to encourage the national reporters to think, well, what does the nature and scope of the legal profession mean for how online legal education has developed in the past and might develop into the future, along with the other factors like the extent of ICT development in those countries, funding for universities, both private and public, and so on, and of course the COVID pandemic impact. I'd also like to acknowledge in this venue and for the recording the publisher, Intercentia, particularly Rebecca Moffat, and a very professional team who produced these fine volumes in the series from the Academy's 4 yearly major congresses. I just hope that they do bring down the price, at least for the ebook version, especially considering the topic of this particular one. I'd also like to thank my second daughter, Erica, who's here tonight, for providing the artwork. You'll notice the designers shifted it around. There were some constraints, but I think this was a lovely work to add to the book. And thank also the rest of my immediate family. All of them are here tonight. So thank you for supporting this book launch. And finally, for hosting tonight, I'd like to thank our Dean, Simon Bronnett, and Sydney Law School, including Centre for Asian Pacific Law, Jean Huang, Simon Budd, and of course, Carla and Ashley in our events team. They're the core of what goes on in these events and so good in their jobs. And finally, I should also end by thanking the University of Wollongong, because I have an honorary affiliation there with the new Transnational Law and Policy Centre, and Associate Professor Marcus Wagner, who leads that, helped provide some editorial assistance for the book. And his dean, Trish Munden, who also unfortunately can't join us tonight, kindly co-authored a terrific chapter in the book on Australia's experience with online legal education. So thank you again, Chief Justice, for your insightful remarks, and to all my colleagues, family, friends, and others who've attended to support this event. Thank you.